I'm Chris Burns, and welcome to The Network, hard talk with a matrix of newsmakers. The headlines. Turkey's snap elections come at a critical moment. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan aims to avoid the hung parliament from a June vote, but polls show no clear winner. With billions in potential EU funding, his government agrees to improve conditions for refugees and fight illegal immigration, aggravating the migrant crisis. It's under fire for cracking down on ethnic Kurds and the media, and for airstrikes against Kurdish fighters in Iraq, though NATO depends on its support in the Syrian war. How could these elections impact Turkish-EU relations? How much must the EU look the other way on civil rights issues to maintain Turkey's support in the region? Now, wired into this edition of the network here at the European Parliament in Brussels, Marietje Schaake, Dutch member of the Parliament's Alliance for Liberals and Democrats, or ALDE, a member of the International Trade Committee, and a substitute member on the Human Rights Committee. Zafer Sirakaria, chairman of the AK Party's Brussels office, that's the governing party of Turkish President Erdogan, and Nikola Dimitrov of the Hague Institute for Global Justice, which promotes conflict resolution, good governance, and rule of law. Welcome to all of you. Question to all of you, starting with Marietje. How much is the Turkish election campaign impacting the refugee crisis and vice versa? Is the government seen as doing the right thing with the refugees, with the Kurds, with securing the borders?
Well, I think both in Europe and in Turkey, people are very concerned about the enormous amounts of refugees that are fleeing a terrible war that has to be stopped first and foremost. And I do see in the opinion polls that also the Turkish population is increasingly concerned about the high numbers of refugees and the way in which not only in the short term but in the long term this has to go forward. So it is very important that the circumstances of their shelter improve.
Okay, Zafer, how is that playing at home? How much is this an election issue?
Actually, we are still hosting 2.5 million refugees in Turkey, and we will host, if it is possible, also another people coming from Syria, because we cannot leave them to the Assad regime, who are just bombing them with the barrel bombs, and this doesn't play any role in our election campaign.
But Nikola, do you think is Turkey doing the right thing, not only with the refugees but also dealing with the Kurds, with securing the borders? Are they doing the right thing?
It's really key that the peace process is back on track on the Kurdish issue, and there is this dangerous tendency of divide and rule and polarize before every elections. And that's a very dangerous game to be played.
Maybe I should come back to you, Zafer, because on that issue, I mean, the government is under fire from the Europeans for cracking down on the Kurds. How do you see that?
The first thing is that we have to differentiate between the Kurds and between the PKK terrorists. The PKK is accepted as a terrorist organization, not just in Turkey, but also in the European countries. And the peace process was started by the AK party, and we are still interested in order to continue it. But you cannot continue it when the PKK terrorists are trying to harm you, and nearly 150 police officers and military officers were killed by the PKK. And so we have to say openly that we have to fight against this terrorist organization.
But in cracking down on the PKK, though, isn't the government also seen as, in some ways, cracking down on the pro-Kurdish party HDP, Marietje?
Well, absolutely. I think that the lines are unfortunately too blurred. Nobody disputes that terrorism is unacceptable and should be fought if necessary.
As we saw during this election campaign, there was that horrible attack that we saw in the intro.
It was terrible. I was in Turkey when it happened, but I do worry about the aggressive language, the blurring of HDP members and voters with terrorists. I think that should be absolutely separated, and that the government and the AK party of President Erdogan has a key responsibility in stopping the personal and aggressive attacks in language on journalists and minorities alike.
Nikola, yes. What about, she's also talking about the cracking down on the media as well. How do you see that? Should the government be easier on that? And is that not complicating its efforts to get closer to the EU?
The Turkish democracy is under big threat, and you have to try really hard to find good news in all of the reports internationally on the state of the freedom of the press in Turkey. And actually the situation deteriorated after the corruption scandal in December 2013. So talking about the elections, it's not quite a very level playing field.
All right, Zafer, how do you answer that?
I was
both on the media and on the Kurds. You're in a difficult position. Your government's in a difficult position there.
The first thing is that HDP has to show and to give a huge distance to the PKK terrorists. We cannot hear from the HDP that they are really against the PKK terrorist activities that we see in the last 6 months. The other point is insulting the president and the prime minister is a different thing. The freedom of expression is a different thing. You cannot even in Europe, in any country in Europe, call the president as a murderer.
Maricia, you were shaking your head there.
The media are under serious and systematic pressure in Turkey. This is not just about insults. In fact, it's about personal attacks on journalists, intimidation, excessive and politically motivated tax fines on media companies, raids of media companies, personal violence used against columnists recently. This is very, very worrying and does not enable an environment and a debate for free elections.
Nicola, what would you like to see the government do to remedy this image problem?
I think it's deeper than an image problem. I think it's one brave Turkish columnist put it. I see a gradual murder of the Turkish democracy. So I think the country should use this bloodiest, deadliest attack in the republic's history to build national unity and to restore also the justice system. Because there was one deputy of the opposition party, of the Republican People's Party, who said there are more critics of the government jailed than actually ISIL members jailed.
Okay, Zafer, I know you want to answer this, but I know that there's a lot of politics in play here, because if you're able to tie the PKK with the HDP, you could stand maybe to gain some votes, and you want to try to prevent the HDP from reaching the point where they prevent you from getting your absolute majority. We see there's a lot of politics in play here.
The most important thing is freedom of expression is one of the main pillars of the democracy. We are also aware of it, and we want to better it and to strengthen it. But insulting and freedom of expression, we have to differentiate it, and we will do it also in the future.
Okay, now the EU is in a difficult position here, because you've got to do business with the Turkish government in order to deal with the refugee crisis. At the same time, you've got these civil rights issues. How much are you going to have to look the other way on these civil rights issues to get Turkish cooperation to deal with the refugees, Maricia?
Well, I don't think Europe can or should look the other way. It's very important that the Turkish people understand what European values and also the criteria for accession actually mean for their quality of life. The fundamental rights issues, the rule of law issues, are a separate matter from the refugee crisis, and one can never be traded away for the other. So we will keep being vigilant when it comes to the safeguarding of rights and freedoms of all Turkish people.
Okay, vigilant. And Nicola, I know this is your job of your institute to try to uphold the rule of law, but you've got to find some kind of compromise with the Turks, don't you?
Europe is now between a rock and a hard place. You have to have Turkey in some sort of arrangement in terms of facing the refugee, dealing with the refugee crisis. On the other hand, and save the day. But if you don't think long term, if you don't really practice what you preach, democracy and civil rights, then you will actually undermine Turkish stability in the long run. And then we're going to have a bigger, much bigger challenge than the Syrian refugees.
Zafer, last word. How are you going to practice what you preach?
We will continue our work about this issue, and I think the long-term policy should be about the refugee crisis, to intensify our work with Turkey in order to give a better shelter for the refugees, both in Europe and in Turkey as well.
Thank you very much, Zafer. I'd like to thank all of you, all of our guests, Maricia Shake, Zafer Sirakaya, and Nikola Dimitrov. I'm Chris Burns, and thanks for connecting with the network.